Every afternoon, at exactly 4:15, the old woman walked into the little diner on Maple Street, wearing the same faded blue coat and carrying the same worn leather purse. She would sit at the corner table by the window, order a bowl of chicken soup and a glass of water, then eat alone in complete silence while the world rushed past outside. No one knew her name. The waitresses called her the quiet lady. The regular customers barely noticed her anymore. But everyone noticed one thing. Before taking her first bite, she always unfolded a second napkin and placed it carefully on the empty seat across from her, as if she were waiting for someone who never came. For nearly 3 years, the routine never changed. Rain or snow, holiday or weekday, she always came alone, and every day she looked at that empty chair with the same heartbreaking expression, a mixture of hope and grief that lingered in her tired eyes long after she finished eating. Most people were too busy to ask questions. Some assumed she had lost her husband. Others guessed she was lonely. A few simply looked away because sadness made them uncomfortable. But one man couldn't stop thinking about her. His name was Daniel Brooks, a 38-year-old construction worker who had recently moved back to town after his divorce. Life had not gone the way he expected. His marriage had ended quietly, without screaming or betrayal, just two people slowly becoming strangers. Now he lived alone in a small apartment above a hardware store, eating microwave dinners and pretending he enjoyed the silence. Every day after work, he stopped at the diner for coffee before heading home, and every day he noticed the old woman. At first, he ignored her like everyone else, but over time, something about her routine began to bother him. Not because it was strange, because it felt familiar. Loneliness recognizes loneliness. One freezing December evening, Daniel watched the old woman struggle to button her coat before leaving the diner. Her hands trembled badly from arthritis. A younger couple sitting nearby glanced at her impatiently as they waited to pass. Daniel stood up instinctively. "Here," he said softly, "let me help." The woman looked startled. Up close, she seemed older than he expected. Deep lines crossed her face like cracks in porcelain, but her eyes were gentle. "Thank you," she whispered. "You come here every day?" Daniel asked. She smiled faintly. "Almost." Daniel hesitated. He almost walked away, almost chose silence like everyone else. But something stopped him. He glanced at the empty seat beside her table, then finally asked the question no one else ever had. "Why do you always set a napkin there?" For a moment, the diner became strangely quiet. The old woman lowered her eyes to the floor. Daniel immediately regretted asking. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to." "No," she interrupted gently. "It's all right. Most people just don't care enough to ask." She slowly sat back down. Then, after a long silence, she spoke words Daniel would never forget. "That seat belongs to my son." Daniel's chest tightened. "He died?" he asked carefully. The woman shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Not exactly. Her name was Margaret Hale. 22 years earlier, her son Michael had joined the army at 19 before leaving for basic training. He promised her one thing: every Thursday at 4:15, we'll eat together when I come home. It became their tradition whenever he visited. Same diner, same table, same soup. Then one winter, Michael was deployed overseas. At first, letters arrived every week, then every month, then nothing. Months later, military officers appeared at Margaret's door and informed her that Michael was missing in action. No body was ever recovered. No confirmation, no funeral, just absence. People told her to move on, to accept reality. But Margaret couldn't, because as long as there was no proof he was gone, a part of her believed her son might still walk through those diner doors one day at 4:15. So she kept coming, every day, for 22 years. Daniel felt tears burn behind his eyes. "My God," he whispered. Margaret smiled sadly. "I know it sounds foolish." "No," Daniel said immediately, "it doesn't." For the first time in years, someone truly looked at her, not with pity, but understanding. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Margaret sitting alone for 2 decades, holding on to hope while the rest of the world moved forward. The next afternoon, he returned to the diner earlier than usual. And when Margaret arrived, she froze in surprise. Daniel was sitting at her table, in the empty chair. "I hope you don't mind," he said awkwardly. "I figured nobody should eat alone." Margaret's eyes filled with tears instantly. From that day on, Daniel joined her every afternoon. At first, they barely spoke. But slowly the silence between them softened. Margaret told stories about Michael as a little boy, how he loved baseball, hated broccoli, and once tried to rescue a stray dog during a thunderstorm. Daniel shared stories too, about his failed marriage, about how empty life had become, about how he sometimes drove around after work just to avoid going home. Somehow, two lonely people began healing each other. Weeks turned into months. The diner staff noticed Margaret laughing again, really laughing, the kind that lights up a room. Then came Christmas Eve. The diner was nearly empty when Margaret reached into her purse and handed Daniel a small wrapped box. "You didn't have to get me anything," he said. "It's not much," she replied. Inside was an old silver wristwatch. Daniel looked confused. "It belonged to Michael," Margaret explained softly. "He wore it every day." Daniel immediately shook his head. "No, I can't take this." "Yes, you can." Her voice trembled. "For 22 years, I prayed for God to send someone to sit in that chair. I thought I was waiting for my son, but maybe I was waiting for you." Daniel couldn't speak. Tears rolled down his face openly now. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You gave an old woman something I thought I'd lost forever," she whispered. "Company, kindness, family." 3 months later, Margaret stopped coming to the diner. Daniel panicked. He drove to her small house across town and found her sitting peacefully in a chair by the window, too weak to stand. The doctor said her heart was failing. Daniel visited every single day after work, and on her final evening, Margaret smiled faintly as he held her hand. "You know," she whispered, "I don't think Michael is gone anymore." Daniel swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" She looked at him with warmth shining in her tired eyes. "I think pieces of the people we love find their way back to us, through other people." Those were among the last words she ever spoke. Margaret passed away quietly that night. At her funeral, attendance was small. A few neighbors, 2 diner waitresses, Daniel. But something unexpected happened afterward. The owner of the diner placed a small brass plaque on the corner table by the window. It read, "Reserved for kindness." Years later, people still ask about that plaque. And every Thursday at 4:15, one man still sits there, not because he's waiting for someone, but because he learned something extraordinary from an old woman who refused to give up hope. Sometimes the greatest act of love is simply showing up for someone who believes the world has forgotten them.